Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is now in session. Today is Tuesday, November 27th, 2018. The time is just after 9:05 a.m. and we are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. And we have one matter on the calendar for today, and that is American Tower Corporation, case number 6123-1 for a short variance, and then later in the afternoon, the chairman has a pre-hearing teleconference on another matter. Who is here today representing American Tower Corporation?
Good morning.
If you could, whoever's speaking, please turn on your microphone and bring it close to you because we keep an audio recording.
Good morning. My name is Eric Francisconi from Fitzgerald Yap Creditor, LLP. With me is David Kelly, also an attorney with our firm, and we're here with Thomas Folk from American Tower Corporation.
Thank you. Can you please spell your name first and last for the record?
Yes, first name Eric, E-R-I-C. Last name Francisconi, F-R-A-N-C-I-S-C-O-N-I.
Thank you, Mr. Francisconi. And who is representing the executive officer today?
Nancy S. Feldman for the executive officer.
Thank you, Ms. Feldman. We have received proposed conditions, I assume from the district. And so we will mark that as Exhibit A, as an apple. We'll just take a quick moment to look that over. And in the meantime, Mr. Francisconi, if you have a short opening statement, you can make that now.
Thank you very much. American Tower Corporation operates a cell tower in Agawanga. These towers require telecommunications and power. And in order to support the power going to the tower, they have a backup generator. That backup generator only runs when there is an emergency condition in which the regular power to the tower does not operate, or for 20-minute weekly tests. That particular backup generator is part of the agreement that American Tower has with T-Mobile, and the idea is to support T-Mobile's operations in that area. The permit is for 200 hours of usage annually for that backup generator. And as we sit here today, it has exceeded that 200-hour annual limit by 12.7 hours. And the reasons for that is this. First of all, the Cranston fire that took place back in July, the power was shut off by Edison to that particular tower, so the backup generator came on. There have been some unanticipated outages because of high winds, and there was a short outage earlier in November. So these were all unanticipated circumstances. I know there was actually a video of how these hearings work. This is my first time at such a hearing. But in the video, it was actually at 4:57 actually of the video, it talked about circumstances that can't be reasonably anticipated. And those are equipment failure, power outages, natural disasters, and fire. And all four of those are really behind why the backup generator operated more than the 200 hours. The importance of the backup generator is obviously to make sure that T-Mobile's communications for its customers continues to run. And for that, we cite public safety as a reason why we'd want to continue that in operation. In fact, I note that back in July in the Cranston fire, this bit of an apocryphal story, but it did occur that Verizon limited cell phone usage because some of the public safety officials were using more than their allotted time, and so they throttled back the operations of Verizon cell towers, and that ended up being a problem for public safety communications, and Verizon took a lot of heat for that and said they would never do it again. We want to avoid a situation like that where if somebody calls 911, a lot of people don't have landlines anymore. We want to make sure that they have full access to reliable cell phone communications. And of course, there are contractual requirements and that American Tower has to T-Mobile. So, and considering this is a backup generator, it's not the type of thing we ever anticipate using except for the 20-minute weekly tests. So really the variance we're asking for is simply to be able to use that on an emergency basis through the balance of 2018 with some time for testing in the month of December. That is my statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Feldman, your opening.
Yes, thank you. The district's not opposed to the granting of the variance here today. Sadly, this is not the first time that the hearing board has heard a variance petition under very similar circumstances. In fact, the last time I appeared before this board with a substantially similar case, it was also due to the devastation of the Cranston fire. We do have questions for petitioner that I believe they will anticipate in terms of what actions they took to monitor the hourly usage of the generator in question so that we know that the petition was filed timely. Obviously, they need a variance now for a very short period of time, only through the end of the year, and have agreed to the conditions that were submitted as Exhibit A.
Thank you. Mr. Francisconi, you mentioned that you actually had watched the video of how to proceed before us. I assume then you're familiar with the 6 findings that this board needs to make for a variance?
We are.
Okay. So if you want to, in whatever order you want to, introduce your witnesses and take us through the findings, that would be, and, actually, before I do that, I should swear in all witnesses who are going to testify. So anyone, including any public witnesses who wish to be heard today and wish to testify, please rise to be sworn in.
Why don't you go ahead, just in case? Yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Francisconi, when you introduce each witness, if you can please just have them state their name, spell it for the record, state what their title is, and also just state for the audio recording that they took the oath today. That would be helpful.
Very good. All right, we would first like to call Thomas Folk. Mr. Folk, if you could state and spell your name, please.
Thomas Folk, Thomas. F is in Frank, Oulk.
And you're employed by American Tower, is that correct?
Correct.
What's your job title?
Territory Manager, Operations.
And are you familiar with the particular tower? Oh, by the way, did you take the oath this morning?
Yes, I did take the oath.
Very good, thank you. And are you familiar with the tower and the backup generator located at 43395 McLean Lane in Agawanga, California?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And you heard my opening statement as to the purpose of the tower and the backup generator. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I also mentioned that the backup generator is tested on a weekly basis. And is that 20 minutes per test?
20 minutes per test, correct.
Okay. Now, what processes are in place to monitor the usage of the backup generator?
The generator is monitored by our Network Operations Center, and that data is collected and provided to our Environmental Health and Safety team, and then they get a daily report that they monitor, for the entire nation, the usage of all of our generators.
And is there a spreadsheet created from that?
Yes, there is.
Oh, okay. I'd like to show you what I guess might be our Exhibit B today then, if that's how we are labeling our exhibit.
For petitioner, we will use numbers.
Oh, very good.
Since the district had introduced the proposed conditions, we had A, B, and C for that.
Very good.
So if you have the copies, if you can, before you introduce it, if you can please make sure Ms. Feldman has a copy, and the rest of the copies, if you can give for distribution to the board, to the clerk of the board, please.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I'll just take a moment just to make sure we all have a copy before you proceed.
Absolutely.
We have received a multiple-page document entitled Report 4467 ANZA Generator, and we're going to mark that as Exhibit number 1.
Thank
You may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Falk, is that the report for the particular generator in question for the year 2018?
Yes, it is.
Is this report maintained in the ordinary course of business for American Tower?
Yes, it is, by our EH&S,
By whom? I'm sorry?
our environmental health and safety team.
Okay. And if we look at well, first of all, let me also say, now does this monitor the usage per day for that particular generator?
Yes, it shows the usage per day.
Okay. Now, if we go to the very last page, there is, on the right-hand side on the bottom in yellow, there is a amount of 212.7. Is that the total use of that generator for the year 2018?
Yes, to date, yes, it is.
There were those times that the generator was in use over and above the testing. If we go to July, specifically for the entries for July 25th through August 3rd. If I can turn you to that, please. The dates are in the second column from the left. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that was, there was it looks like if we look at the fourth column for under run mode, emergency, etc., for hours, those are the times that the generator was running in the green. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the total operations on the far right column also show the amount of time that the generator was running. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was based on the shutdown of the power to that particular tower because of the Cranston fire. True?
Correct.
Okay. And then there was some additional usage if we skip ahead to October. On October 17th, it's the second item from the bottom on that particular page, there was a usage of 15.7 hours that day. Was that based upon high winds at the time?
Correct.
Okay. And then if we skip ahead, there was also an emergency, there's some emergency usage on November 12th and November 15th. And was that because of power outages in the area?
Correct.
Okay. Let's take a look at the 6 findings. Is American Tower in violation of the conditions of the permit by exceeding the 200-hour yearly limit on the usage of the backup generator?
Yes.
And that's by the 12.7 hours, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, by continued potential operation of the backup generator, may American Tower potentially further exceed the 200-hour limit on the operation of the backup generator?
Yes, it would.
Now, if there is another power outage before the end of the year, what harm would American Tower suffer if it is not permitted to operate the backup generator?
We would not meet our contractual obligations to T-Mobile, and T-Mobile would not be able to be operating on the air for its customers.
Okay. And so in other words, would the customers be unable to have cell reception in that area?
That would be correct.
Okay. What is have you done any analysis of the extent of the contaminants that would result from the operation of the backup generator?
Our EH&S team has.
Okay. And let me show you what will be our Exhibit 2 then. You wanna hand that to- Thank you.
we're going to mark as Exhibit 2 a one-page document that has emissions data on it.
Okay. Mr. Falk, have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what is this document?
This shows the emissions that are put out by the generator.
Okay. And does it purport to show what the emissions are per hour?
Yes.
Okay. And does it also purport to show, in fact, let me, if I can take a look at the one copy we kept here, the total potential emissions if it were to run constantly, even from today all the way through the end of the year?
Yes.
Okay, and that's under the columns that say potential emissions between 11/26 to 12/31?
Correct.
Okay. And then the various categories of pollutants are defined down below the table, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, if the tower were to fail, and we've talked about this briefly already, what effect would that have on T-Mobile's customers?
They would probably, it'd be limited capacity for them to make calls in the area depending on their signal strengths.
Okay. And are you aware, as you sit here, what other coverage that T-Mobile has in the area?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Now, T-Mobile is, American Tower does business with several carriers, is that correct?
Correct.
All the, in fact,
All
all
of
the
them,
major carriers.
yes.
Right. But the carriers themselves decide where they need to put backup generators, is that right?
That is correct.
So from your experience, carriers tend to put backup generators in an area where it is more critical if that particular tower were to go down. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Now, has American Tower considered curtailing the use of the backup generator?
Yes, we have.
Why isn't that a realistic option instead of applying for this variance?
Well, we would like to be able to, maintain T-Mobile's operation for its customers in the area and meet all of our obligations.
Okay. Is, however, American Tower prepared to limit its 20-minute weekly testing going through the end of the year?
Yes, we would be.
Now, during the period the variance is in effect, what can American Tower do to reduce excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible? In other words, well, let me rephrase that. Is the intent of the variance that American Tower would only use the backup generator to the extent that the power were to go down in the area?
Yes, we would only use it for emergency backup.
Okay. Now, during the period the variance is in effect, will American Tower continue to monitor the daily usage of the backup generator?
Yes, as we always do.
Okay. And it will continue to create the spreadsheets and tables that are generally created in the ordinary course of business. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions from Mr. Falk.
Thank you very much. Ms. Feldman, any questions for Mr. Falk?
Yes, just a few. The weekly testing that's done of the engine, is that done by someone on site in person?
No, it's remotely done.
That too is remotely done. And the monitoring that produced Exhibit 1, that's remotely done as well, right?
Correct.
How remote are we talking? Where are the people who are doing
Our
this?
network operations center is based in Cary, North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. And they generate a daily report?
The daily report is actually generated by our EH&S team, our Environmental Health and Safety team.
And they're here local?
No,
Oh, where are
they're in
they?
our Woburn, Massachusetts office.
Okay.
They do this on a national basis for the whole country for all of our generators.
So when does anybody locally get this information? How long does it take?
You can get it daily if you reach out to the EH&S team.
Okay. So using Exhibit 1, can you tell us when the engine exceeded the 200-hour limit?
I don't know that it has a running total.
I don't think it does, but I'll look back. 12, 2, 4. Would have been on the 10/17.
Okay. And what happened after that? What actions were taken after that?
Our EHS team, I talked to the manager up there about this, and she said there was an internal discussion on these that, well, I mean, on that one when we went over, they had already talked prior, back in July, and looked at it that, you know, they would monitor it closely, and then we were already preparing to ask for an extension, but it went over, and now it got to us before we got here.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So in July, when it was run so much due to the fire, there were people at the company who were concerned about the 200-hour limit back then?
Yes, and they were going to closely monitor it because we were in the 180s at that point.
Okay. And was there a conclusion drawn at that time that it was more likely than not that you'd make it through the end of the year?
They calculated the testing run times, and it gave us approximately 8 hours of emergency time, and they thought they would just closely monitor it to see if that would work for them.
Okay, but on October 17th, they realized, oops, went
Yeah.
over. Okay, and the variance petition was filed, do you recall the date? I believe you got an ex parte, is that right? Before?
Was it November 4th? We have, Mr. Kelly actually is here for those kinds of issues, so.
Okay, I can defer that question. We do have in the file, the date on the request is 11/6. But that's fine. Thank you. I have no further questions.
For the record, the ex parte was denied, is that's correct, right? The ex parte was denied. And just for the record, since only the chair was privy to that, it was based on the timing, which Ms. Feldman just fleshed out with Mr. Falk regarding how long it took to file for the ex parte, but on no other reason than that. Mr. Falk, can you tell us, do you have an idea, or do you know for sure, past years, whether this generator has ever gone over 200, or what the average
No, it has
hours?
not.
Do you know? No, it has not gone over the 200. And do you know approximately what the average usage has been? Has it been well below the 200 hours?
It's only been installed since 2016. And I'm not, you know, right now have what the average was for those previous years.
Okay, thank you. Although I would say, looking at, this was very helpful, this log that you've provided. It looks like, is this correct? There was really only testing and maintenance until July, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that seems, would that seem pretty normal to you or usual?
Yes, I mean, in case, you know, unless there's a case for an emergency, you know, across the country, we have these generators, you know, they're just going to run on their, you know, once a week times. You know, in some years you go through and you don't have any emergency times, or you have a couple hours. You know, in this case, you know, the Cranston fire was out there, and then with the high winds, and then some of the other things going on with the high winds too is Southern California Edison has started a new program to proactively, in high winds, shut off power to certain areas with the high winds to prevent their, you know, if their lines do fall. So I think that may have been some of the factors there later in the year with the power going out.
Okay, thank you. And just one other question, and I'm sure other members have questions, but with regard to limiting, it looks like you are agreeing to limit the total amount of maintenance use for this generator to 1 hour per month, which would mean it looks like about 20 minutes less per month than normal. Is that within the manufacturer's recommendations, to your knowledge?
I can't speak to the recommendations of the manufacturer, but, for this short a time, I mean, we could cut it to every other week, and I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, so you feel that that's appropriate? Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Dr. Lerner has questions, and then Ms. Bird.
Are there any emergency services that use those lines? Because you only mentioned one commercial company, one telephone company.
No, currently on that site right now, only T-Mobile is the only user of the backup generator.
So really, it's about supplying customers, but not having the emergency services be vulnerable.
Well, I think one of the things we can all see during, the wildfires out here is that, CAL FIRE and all the other, firemen out here rely on communications, for people to evacuate and, coordinate and things like that.
Right.
Case in point is they protect our mountain sites in those areas where we've had the, the Woolsey fire and that, they were up there defending those sites, and that's the reason they defend them, is that keeps communications up for them and, getting communications out for evacuees and all those kind of things, so.
Understandable. I think there are probably other members of the board, and I can't speak for the other attorneys, but I was troubled by the fact that the first thing that came to mind here was that on 10/17 you knew that you were over, but you waited 20 days before you filed anything. Why 20 days?
That was by our EH&S department. I assume there was coordination time, between our EH&S and department talking to legal on what our actions needed to be.
We do have Mr. Kelly who can speak more to that issue.
I would appreciate his input. Yeah, thank you.
And we can get to that. Just a reminder to board members that we are not here on an emergency. We are here on a noticed hearing. So while important to understand what occurred, it's less important. And we're really more focused on the beyond reasonable control at this point. Ms. Bird had questions.
Yes, I just wanted to just not make a point, but just go to get a confirmation from you. On Exhibit 1, the engine run hours, you said this engine was put into use in 2016, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so at 56.7 hours that commenced, or that where the engine was on January 1st of this year, that meant that since 2016, it had only run 56.7 hours, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to, for the record.
Good catch.
Thank you.
Mr. Balagopalan.
Yes, Mr. Falk. On hindsight, have you made any changes so that you are notified by your ENHS department when you are going to be very close to the
We
200
haven't made a
hours?
final decision on it, but what we're looking at, in the discussions with them is we need to look at it closer. They weren't as used to this as we are locally with the limited hours. In what we're talking about now is to have a set percentage, that if we get to a certain percentage of hours, whether that be, 70% or something, and take a more proactive approach in coming and try not to push the edge and say, oh, we'll make it till the end of the year. So we are in those discussions to put that practice in, because this is not the only generator we have in Southern California, so.
So are you talking about changes to the program so that it flags that?
Correct.
Currently, does it do that? Does it give a running total? I mean, I see it at the very end, but does it give a daily running summary for the year?
I don't read it on a daily basis. Our EH&S team is, so I'm assuming they look at it that way.
But does the program give that on the summary too for the year to date on a daily basis?
I don't see it on a daily basis, so.
No, but do you know if the program does it?
I do not
Oh,
know.
you don't? Okay.
And I don't mean to be a recipient witness, but I can tell you that when I printed this particular exhibit from an Excel spreadsheet, there were other spreadsheets, including, I believe, one that did calculate it on an ongoing basis. When I was deciding what to bring, I thought this would be the most helpful exhibit.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Fong? Yes.
I just had
Ms. Bird.
one follow-up. You mentioned that you would, because of the limited amount of time between now and the end of the year when this would basically reset, that you would be willing to only test every other week? Is that what you said?
Yes.
So in condition number 1 that says no more than 1 hour per month, that's Exhibit A. We could say no more than, it would be less than 1 hour a month. But we could restrict that further so that accommodated what you,
But it's 20 minutes per run.
okay,
and that
so you would have
the-
3 times.
Yeah, that would give
that
us
you could-
3 times, but
Okay.
just to be safe, to make it, it runs on, the way you program it, it is, is it once a week, once a month, once every other, so we could program it for every other week.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Falk?
Just
Oh, yes, Mr. Balagopalan.
on the, while we're on the condition number 1, is there any issue in changing the word exercising to testing?
We would have no objection to
I
that.
have no objection to it.
Okay.
Seeing no objection from either side,
No objection.
we will change Exhibit A to be testing. Any other questions for Mr. Falk? Okay. Mr. Franciscani, do you have, and you had another witness, is that correct?
I do, and I'm going to change the microphones here so that we can call David Kelly. Mr. Kelly, you are an attorney with Fitzgerald Yap Creditor, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've worked with American Tower on various cases?
Just this one,
Just
actually.
this one, okay. And when did you become involved in this particular case?
I became involved approximately in July, around the time of the Cranston fires.
May I just interrupt? If you can just, Mr. Kelly, just spell your name for the record and also just state that, I know you took the oath, but if you can state that.
Sure. My name, David Kelly, D-A-V-I-D, and last name is K-E-L-L-Y, and I did take the oath earlier.
And when you became involved in July, was it for the purposes of advising American Tower as to how to proceed as to the South Coast Air Quality Management District and this particular backup generator?
Yes, we were looking at the options based on the hour usage to determine if we should submit for a variance.
And what determination was made in July as to whether or not to seek a variance?
In July, the determination was there was an appropriate amount of time remaining in the 200-hour annual allotment to not file a petition at that time.
There was additional usage in October that brought the usage much closer to the 200 hours. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And were you involved in consultations with American Tower at that point?
Yes, I was.
And what was decided through those consultations?
Through the consultations, it was determined that once the October 17th 15.6 hours was used, which was a significant block of time, at that point we knew we would need to file for a variance. There was a high wind warning for the area, I believe 2 to 3 days following the 17th. And the required gathering of information, coordinating back and forth with American Tower from the East Coast. On top of that, waiting for the high wind advisory did take additional time once we hit the 200-hour mark.
And what was the reason why, when those consultations were taking place in October, mid-October, why did it take until November 6th to file the ex parte petition for a variance?
Waiting for high winds, the high wind advisory to pass to see if we would need additional time. Also coordinating with the company back east, receiving a hard copy of a check for the payment of the petition in the mail added additional time to the process.
When you were in the process of advising the company, were you under the impression that you would need to ask for a specific amount of time from the AQMD?
I believe the petition does require, and we did include a request for an additional hourly allotment of 75 hours for the remainder of the year.
And so when you were asked, when you talked about the fact that you were waiting, there were additional high wind warnings, was that one of the reasons why? Because you needed to understand that information to determine how many hours to ask for in the variance?
Correct. That it can result in a significant increase in the number of hours that are used. An example is October 17th, when there was an additional 15.6 hours of generator time as a result of high winds.
Thank you. Open them up, Mr. Kelly, for questions from the board.
Thank you. Ms. Feldman, do you have any questions for Mr. Kelly?
No, thank you.
Before I open for questions, I assume at this point, American Tower is aware that for this type of variance, a precise number of hours does not need to be requested. And I just wanted to ask real quickly, if there was something on the petition that, if you recall, that made you think that a specific number of hours needed, just quickly, if you know off the top of your head.
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay, because we're in the process of changing the petition form is why I ask. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Kelly? Yes, Mr. Balagopalan.
Mr. Kelly, did American Tower get a notice of violation for exceeding the 200 hours?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator.
The variance period begins when? What's the date of it?
What they're requesting?
Yes.
I assume it's today, is that
Yeah,
correct?
my understanding was it would be running from today, going through the balance of the year.
Balance of the year, so roughly 1 month,
Yeah, just until December 31st, right?
right? And so therefore, how many hours extra are you asking for?
It was my understanding that we did not need to ask for an additional set amount of hours except for the specific amount of time allotted for the testing and maintenance. Otherwise, it would just be for whatever would be required for an emergency. Hopefully, we wouldn't operate it at all outside of that.
So for testing and maintenance, 1 hour per month.
That is what is in the proposed conditions, and we're
Therefore,
certainly fine with that.
You would only exceed the variance period one time.
Well, we have exceeded the 200 hours,
But
yes.
during the variance, you will exceed it just one time. And therefore, you'll be paying a fine to the clerk for that time period, according to this.
No one has said that to us, actually, but we can, I know there is, that has not been communicated.
If we
to
adopt the proposed conditions, have you read those?
Yes.
That's what it says, I think.
Well, pay appropriate excess emissions fees, yes. We do not know if that's not necessary. I don't know if that means a fine. I don't know that it does, so.
May I just jump in? It is not a fine. Excess emission fees are under district rules, and we'll talk about that during deliberation, but generally it's for any hour during the variance period or any time for which you would be using the generator, whether it's for maintenance purposes or emergency purposes.
Very good, thank you.
So make sure we're on the same track. That's why I'm raising these issues, and you can discuss it at will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Francisconi, any other witnesses?
We have no other witnesses.
Thank you very much. Ms. Feldman, do you have any witnesses you intend to call? Okay. With that said, let me first ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to be heard on this matter, and seeing none. Mr. Francisconi, would you like to give a brief closing statement?
I think the issues are rather clear, so I won't belabor the points. Again, we will continue to monitor. We are fine with the proposed conditions, and we appreciate the board's attention to the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Feldman, any closing statements?
I agree that this seems to be a very straightforward matter that doesn't warrant a lot of discussion. There was some curiosity about the timing of the filing of the petition. I think the petitioner was probably in a very awkward position in July when, after the Cranston fire, when the hours of operation of this particular generator really started to accumulate. Looking at the findings that you have to make in order to grant a variance, the very first one is that you are or will be in violation. Well, they were not in violation at that time. They still had 15 hours left after the Cranston fire before they would be up on the 200 hours of operation. If we look at Exhibit 1 and you see the first entry, as Ms. Bird noted, they seem to operate this engine something less than 30 hours a year ordinarily. So that 15 hours at the end of July should have taken them through the end of the year, but for the circumstances in October, compounded by high winds in November. So they rolled the dice and they kind of lost, but they didn't realize that until October. I don't know at what point the hearing board would have felt comfortable making a determination that they would be in violation of district rules prior to October. So that being the case, the district's certainly not opposed to the granting of the variance, subject to the conditions submitted.
Thank you, Ms. Fellman. And I think that's a very fair assessment, and I agree. It's a very difficult position for petitioners to be in with these generators and knowing when you're going to cross that line for the first finding. And I don't believe that. I think we would have been having a very difficult discussion back then if you had come in July. So I don't think that was the operative time. I think, as was stated at the time of the application for or the petition for the ex parte emergency, that it should have been in October, but this is now a noticed hearing, and so I think that question becomes less relevant anyway. Would anyone like to begin the discussion? Because Ms. Bird, I'm happy to.
I'll begin. As Ms. Fellman noted in her opening, we've had a few of these actually, and so I think we probably are quite familiar with the way this goes. But I know we can make all 6 findings. The petitioner is already in violation. They have exceeded their 200 hours for the year. It will reset at the end of the year, and they'll be given another 200 hours for 2019, but as of now, they have exceeded their hours. And as was mentioned from the exhibit that they provided to us, and as Ms. Fellman just mentioned, that typically they don't go over, it averages about 30 hours. Based on this 56.7, that would be an average of just about 30 hours that they've used it in the time that they put this engine into operation. So I think we can make that first finding pretty easily. The second finding is it's due to conditions beyond the reasonable control. We've had some really, really rough fires this year, and I would say that would definitely, could definitely meet condition of, they could definitely say that this is beyond their reasonable control with the fires and the winds, and that requiring compliance would be an arbitrary or a reasonable taking of property. If they could not operate this generator, then they would lose out on the contract that they have with T-Mobile, and not just that, we would have no use for public safety in that area if this tower were to not be operational. So I believe that we can make number 2. The closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit. I think the issue of public safety and the issue of limited use of this generator, which we expect, which we're praying that no other natural disasters will take place between now and December. I think that we could say that the closing or taking would be without a corresponding benefit because of the public safety issues, in my opinion. Then that the applicant has given consideration to curtailing. Curtailing would not, well, first of all, they will curtail the amount of maintenance that and testing as that will minimize the contaminants that may be emitted, but they cannot just totally cease at least testing and being prepared in the event of an emergency to run this generator. So there's some curtailment that's been considered, there's some curtailment that will happen, but they cannot reduce it less than the maintenance and exercise for operating, to be prepared to operate it. While the variance is in effect, the applicant will reduce excess emissions. That also goes back to what I just mentioned as far as limiting the amount of testing that will take place. So they are working to reduce excess emissions as much as possible. And the last one, they already are keeping records, and they will continue to keep daily records as is required in the condition number 2 that has been proposed by the district. They will continue to keep daily records and provide them to the district upon request and upon the direction that's provided in the conditions that have been proposed. So I think that we could make all 6 of the findings.
Thank you. Mr. Balagopalan, you had more to add.
Yeah, I was looking at the proposed condition number 3, and regarding excess emissions. So it's any hours they operate either for testing or for emergency purposes, if the board grants the variance today, is considered excess emission. So I suggest we change out, if we are putting a date, we should include maybe January 1st, 2019, when they should report it. So that will cover.
I'm sorry, what date?
The 1st of the January 2019.
I think we, unfortunately, we need to keep it within the,
Calendar year.
well, yes, and we need to keep it within the variance date, but we can make it much later than 15 days from
Yeah,
now.
because if in the event it happened on the 31st, then that had to be included. So then it will be the day after for the whole year. I mean, for the period of the variance.
When a motion is made, but we should set that date, but I think it needs to be within but it could be the end of December.
I was suggesting January 1st, 2019, when they reported, January 1st, 2019, when they report the excess emission. So that would include, in the event December 31st, they had to operate it due to emergency.
Yeah, well, understood, it needs to be within the, okay. Well, we'll get to that when someone makes a motion, but a good point. I also just wanted to add, I agree with everything Ms. Bird said in terms of the recitation of the findings, and I just wanted to add to the beyond reasonable control, since the fire was the main component, but this new high wind policy of the electric company also was beyond their reasonable control and something that was explained as being new. So I think I would just add that as another factor. Anyone else have anything else on the discussion of the 6 findings to add? Seeing none, Ms. Bird, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. In the matter of American Tower Corporation, case number 6123-1, I move that we issue this short variance commencing today through December 31st, 2018 for the facility at 43395 McLean Lane, Aguanga, California, 92536, and it is for the equipment as noted on page 3, item number 6, the internal combustion engine, and it is from the condition, it is from Rule 203B, specifically condition number 4 of the facility permit that limits the use of the generator to 200 hours. Excess emissions, pounds per day, are estimated to be 11.87 pounds of CO, 14.35 pounds of non-methane hydrocarbons and plus NOx, 0.4947 pounds of PM, and I think that's it.
Conditions?
Oh, yeah. And the conditions as found in Exhibit A, with the following change in number 1 to, instead of exercising, which is on the second line near the end, to insert testing in place of the word exercising. And in condition number 3, to insert a date, and it will have to be the day after the the variance, because there's no way to go through the 31st. So we could say, usually this is 15 days after, but that would be outside of the variance. So we'll have to say January 1st, 2019. We can't say December 31st at midnight.
I think it's an issue to make it outside of the date of the variance ending. I think it's fine if we made it, I don't know what day of the week December 30th falls upon, but again, these fees can be adjusted after the fee payment is made, which is why often, or almost always, it's 15 days after the start of the variance, and then they're adjusted accordingly. So I think that's better practice to make it, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but whatever.
December 31st, is that what you're saying?
No, I know that, or will the district be closed on December 31st? I don't know what day of the week that is. I don't have a calendar.
It's a Monday.
That's a Monday, so it'll be closed, so it would have to be the Friday before that. Whatever date that is. So if the 31st is, thank you.
So December 28th? Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So December 28th, and if there is any use past that point, then it will be adjusted after the beginning of the year to accommodate. Okay. And that concludes my motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah.
Mr. Balagopalan was first to second the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none. Senator, how do you vote? Aye. Dr. Lerner, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote yes. Mr. Balagopalan?
Yes.
And Ms. Byrd?
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0, and the short variance is granted. And I just wanted to make I was going to make two comments. One was, in the future, if this should happen again, just to know you do not need to know specific number of hours, but we already covered that. But the second thing is just, and I know we covered this during the hearing and in testimony, but just to be aware that moving forward, this may occur again, given the change in the electric company's practices and the high fire danger. So just to be more on top of it in the future. And that's it. So thank you. Any other business, board members, before we adjourn? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all.